Wyoming Territory, June 1882, the wind rolled across the open plains, brushing against the tall grass like a whisper, when Kellen Cross spotted the broken wagon just off the trail to Laramie. He pulled his horse to a halt. The sun was sharp above and the dust was thick in the air, but even from a distance the scene was clear. A woman no older than 25 crouched beside a splintered wheel, skirts dusty, hair stuck to her cheek. A baby no more than a few months cried somewhere nearby, muffled but insistent. Kellen narrowed his eyes. He had been heading toward a job breaking horses on a ranch 2 days west, just passing through. He had no intention of stopping for anything or anyone, not anymore. He used to believe in marriage, thought it was something a man built his life around. Then Clara left, taking with her the last good piece of him. That was 5 years ago. He had not looked back since. But the woman by the wagon had no business being alone out here, and that baby— Lord, that baby was crying hard. Kellen clicked his tongue and nudged his horse forward. She heard him coming. She stood up fast, one hand over her eyes to block the glare. Her dress was plain blue cotton, worn thin at the knees, and her expression was tight with worry. She held a small bundle against her shoulder, rocking without much hope. "Do not come closer," she called out, voice steady but tired. "I am not here to harm you," Kellen replied, slowing his horse. "Just saw your wagon, thought you might need help." The woman looked at him a moment longer, then lowered her shoulders a notch. Wheel snapped. "Axles cracked clean through, I cannot budge it." "Where were you headed?" "Laramie, my sister's there, or was last I heard." He swung down from his saddle and walked closer, careful not to move too fast. "Name's Kellen Cross," she hesitated. "Vera Ashford." "This is my son, Perry." Kellen tipped his hat. "Ma'am, you alone out here?" "My husband died back in Kansas. Fever took him in April. I thought I could make the rest of the way on my own." Her arms tightened around the baby, who had gone quiet now, eyes wide and blinking up at the bright sky. Kellen looked at the wagon, then back at her. "You will not make it with that wheel, not unless you want to drag the thing 10 miles on foot." "I know that," she said, her voice breaking just a little. "I just do not know what else to do." Kellen rubbed a hand along his jaw. "There is a homestead about 8 miles back. Belongs to a widow who lets travelers stay over if they work for their keep. I can hitch your wagon to my horse and help you back that way. You and Perry can rest there while I ride into town for a new axle." Vera blinked. "You would do that?" "For us?" Kellen gave a half shrug. "I do not like leaving folks stranded." She looked at him, really looked this time. Her eyes weren't the kind that gave away trust easily. They were watchful, like someone who had learned not everyone meant what they said. "I can pay," she added quickly. "Not much, but not asking for money." He bent by the wheel, examining the damage. "I will get us rolling." It took the better part of an hour to get the wagon secured to his horse. Vera kept quiet, only speaking when Perry fussed, whispering softly to calm him. Kellen worked in silence, focused, but every now and then he caught her watching him out of the corner of her eye. He was not used to being looked at like that anymore. By late afternoon, they reached the widow's homestead. The woman, Mrs. Lyle, remembered Kellen from years back and welcomed them in with warm cornbread and cold water. Vera barely touched her food, too tired to eat. She collapsed into the small guest cot with Perry in her arms the moment Mrs. Lyle showed her the room. Kellen stayed outside, watching the last of the sun fall behind the hills. He did not know what made him stop earlier. Maybe it was the sound of that baby crying, or maybe it was the look in Vera's eyes, the same kind of lost weight he had carried for years. But something about her had quieted that old bitterness in his chest. The next morning, Kellen rode into Laramie. Found a blacksmith who had an axle he could cut to size. He returned by dusk, dusty, sore, and surprised to find Vera on the porch with Perry in her lap, humming softly. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You came back," she said, standing. "I said I would." She stepped down from the porch and stopped just a foot away. "Most men do not mean what they say." "I am not most men," he replied, eyes steady. She nodded, slow. "No." "You are not." They did not say more that night, just shared a quiet supper, but something had shifted. Vera laughed once, just a soft sound when Perry tried to grab hold of Kellen's mustache, and the sound stayed with him long after he went to bed. The next day, they fixed the wagon together. Vera held the board steady while Kellen replaced the axle. She worked hard without complaint, and he could not help but notice the way her jaw set when she lifted something too heavy, or when Perry cried and she had to pause to soothe him. She had grit. She had heart. When the wagon was ready, Vera looked at it like she was not sure whether to cry or laugh. "I did not think I would see it whole again," she whispered. "You will get to Laramie," Kellen said. "Safe." She looked up at him, eyes soft now. "Will you come with us?" He hesitated. "You sure you want that?" "I am not asking for more than that. Just having someone I trust close by would make the road feel less long." He nodded. "All right." They left the homestead the next morning. Sunlight caught her hair as she climbed onto the wagon seat. Kellen rode beside them, quiet, but his chest felt lighter than it had in years. He told himself he was just helping, that it meant nothing. But when Vera smiled at him like she did when Perry laughed, Kellen felt something shift deep inside, something he had not felt since before everything went wrong: hope. The wagon rolled slow over the dry earth, its patched wheel creaking under the weight. The trail narrowed between low hills, cottonwoods spotting the edge of a shallow creek that wound alongside them. The air was warm but not yet harsh, the sky a pale sweep of blue without a cloud in sight. Kellen rode his mare just a few paces ahead, reins loose in his hand. He glanced back now and then, not out of worry. Vera handled the reins steady, but because he couldn't seem to help it. Perry was tucked in a sling across her chest, his little head turned toward her heartbeat, quiet for once. "You've been west before?" she asked, guiding the wagon over a shallow rise. "Worked cattle out near the Bighorns once. Spent a winter in Sweetwater, but I prefer the open road." She adjusted the brim of her bonnet. "I was born in Ohio." "Never thought I'd cross the Missouri, let alone make it this far." He waited, sensing more behind her words. "My father traded horses, taught me how to tell a sound one from a sick one, said I had an eye for muscle. My husband didn't like that much. Thought it wasn't a woman's place to speak about geldings." Kellen gave a low chuckle. "There's half a dozen ranch hands I've known who'd have saved themselves trouble if they'd listened to someone with an eye." She smiled just briefly. "Too late now. I've got Perry and I've got the road. That's all that matters." They stopped at a bend in the creek to water the horses. Vera climbed down carefully, holding Perry close. Kellen filled a tin cup and handed it to her without a word. She drank, then crouched by the water to wash her face. The sleeves of her dress were rolled to the elbow, and her forearms were marked with faint bruises, old ones, yellowed at the edges. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. Instead, she dipped a cloth and wiped Perry's face, her touch gentle. "How long since you lost your wife?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer right away. The water moved slow over the rocks, catching sunlight in glints. She left. 5 years back, no fever, just decided I wasn't enough." Vera looked at him now. "That's not the same as dying." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." They traveled on until evening. A patch of cottonwoods offered shade, so they made camp there. Kellen gathered dry branches and lit a fire low, careful of the wind. Vera laid Perry on a folded blanket and rocked him with her foot while she peeled and sliced a few potatoes from her stores. She passed him a tin plate once they were cooked plain, but warm. After the meal, Perry fussed. Kellen offered to walk him, and Vera hesitated, then nodded. Kellen took the bundle carefully, unsure at first he hadn't held a child since his sister's boy, years ago. Perry blinked up at him, solemn and curious. "He likes to be walked near trees," Vera said, watching him. "Something about the leaves moving." Kellen paced with him beneath the branches, the baby's head tucked against his collarbone. Vera sat with her knees drawn up, skirt gathered beneath her, hands idle for once. "I never pictured this," she said after a while. "Not the trail, not the wagon. Certainly not a stranger rocking my child under a cottonwood." "I didn't picture it either," he said. She laughed, tired but not bitter. "What did you picture?" He shifted Perry slightly as the boy dozed. "A house with a porch." A dog, maybe. Some picture the next mile, that's about all I let myself think on. Vera lowered her gaze. I used to count the days until spring. Now I count how many feedings until morning. Kellen didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at the sleeping boy in his arms and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not dread or distance, the things he was used to. Just a quiet sort of weight, like a stone warmed by the sun. When Perry stirred, Vera stood and reached for him. Their hands met briefly and her fingers lingered against his. "I'll take him," she said softly. "All right." The fire was low by the time she laid Perry down in the wagon and returned. Kellen sat with his back against the wheel, legs stretched out, his hat tilted back. "You always ride alone?" she asked. "Been easier that way?" She sat beside him, knees barely touching his. "But not better." He shook his head. "No, not better." They didn't speak again that night. The silence wasn't heavy, it was easy, like something they didn't have to fill. The moon rose pale over the plains and the sound of crickets filled the dark. Kellen didn't sleep much. He kept watch, half out of habit, half out of something else. Vera slept in the wagon with Perry, her breathing steady. Once she turned in her sleep and murmured something he couldn't catch. He sat there until dawn, watching the shadows move, listening to the baby's soft sighs, and wondering when exactly the ache in his chest had started to feel like something he wanted to keep. By the fourth day on the trail, the land began to rise in slow folds, the grass thinning out and giving way to sage and bone-dry soil. Mountains sat far off on the horizon, their ridgelines blurred by heat. Vera kept the reins firm in her hands, eyes on the road ahead, while Perry dozed in her lap beneath the strip of shade cast by the wagon's canvas top. Kellen rode ahead with his shoulders hunched slightly against the sun. He didn't speak much that morning, and Vera didn't press him. But when noon came and they stopped beneath a stand of juniper, the quiet between them felt heavier than usual. Perry stirred, and Kellen offered to walk him again. This time, she handed the baby over without hesitation, her fingers brushing his as she did. He didn't look at her, not right away. "Something on your mind?" she asked. He shifted Perry to his other arm. "Ran into a man in Laramie once. Name was Braxton, rancher from down near Cheyenne. Told me something I never forgot." She waited. "Said a man who's been wounded 2 long starts mistaking the scar for the skin." Vera looked down at her hands, her nails chipped and lined with dust. "You think that's what you've done?" "I know it is." He rocked Perry slowly, the baby's breath soft against his chest. Vera stood, brushing her palms on her skirt, then walked toward the wagon and pulled out a jar of dried apples. She handed him a few slices without speaking. They chewed in silence. Then she said, "When I married Nathan, I thought I understood what it meant to share a life. But all we did was survive side by side. I don't think he ever really knew me." Kellen looked at her then. "And now, I want to be known, even the parts I'm not proud of." He nodded once, solemn. "That takes more than surviving." They didn't speak again until dusk. The sky turned copper, then violet, and the stars came out in slow handfuls. They camped near a dry riverbed, the wagon tucked into a curved bank for shelter. Perry had gone quiet early, worn out from the day's heat. Vera sat near the fire, her knees drawn to her chest, while Kellen tended to the horses. After securing the last hitch, he sat beside her. The flames cast soft light over her face, catching in the strands of hair that had escaped her braid. "I was 16 when my brother died," she said, voice low. "Fell under a team of oxen. My father never spoke much after that, just worked. My mother went quiet too. I learned early not to wait on others to make sense of things." Kellen didn't interrupt. "I think that's why I married Nathan. I mistook his quiet for safety." But it wasn't the same kind. He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. "You ever think of going back east?" "I did," she said. "But no one there remembers me anymore, and I don't belong to that place now. I belong to what I've survived." She turned to face him. "And you? What do you belong to?" He didn't answer right away. The fire snapped softly between them. "I used to think I belonged to the land, to whatever job paid, but lately I've been wondering if that's just another way to stay alone." Vera reached out with slow certainty and covered his hand with hers. "You don't seem like a man made for loneliness." He didn't pull away. "I didn't used to be." They stayed like that until the fire burned low, her fingers resting lightly over his, their silence no longer hollow. That night, thunder rolled far off over the plains. Not close enough to threaten, but near enough to stir something in the blood. Perry whimpered once, then quieted when Vera laid a palm over his back. Kellen lay on the ground beneath the wagon, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't sleep. Not really. His mind stayed fixed on the way her hand had fit over his, how natural it had felt, how little it asked of him beyond honesty. He had spent years believing that marriage was a deal made under false promises, that love was a thing that ran dry when tested. But Vera hadn't promised anything. She had just shown up, weary and determined, with a baby on her hip and no illusions left to break. And somehow, that was the first thing that had made him believe again. They reached the outskirts of Laramie 2 days later, when the wind had shifted and brought the scent of pine down from the higher ridges. The road had widened and grown flatter, the wagon's patched wheel holding steady over packed earth. The town sat low and wide along the river, its buildings weathered but upright, the kind of place that straddled two worlds, the old and the coming. Vera shaded her eyes with her hand. "It's smaller than I pictured." Kellen leaned on his saddle horn, gaze steady on the rooftops ahead. "You'll find your sister here, if she's still at the boarding house on 2nd Street. She didn't sound hopeful, only certain she needed to try. They entered town slowly. Perry stirred as the wagon clattered over boards laid across a shallow ditch. A few townsfolk glanced up from their chores, but no one stared long. In a town like this, everyone had something to carry. They stopped outside the boarding house, a squat structure with peeling paint and narrow windows. Vera handed Perry to Kellen without a word and stepped inside. He shifted the baby gently, the weight familiar now, and stood with his back to the sun, watching the door. She returned after some time, eyes dark with something unreadable. She left for Denver last winter, no forwarding address. Kellen didn't ask what she planned to do next, he just waited. Vera placed a hand on the wagon rail. "There's a woman here named Mrs. Finch. She runs the kitchen for the saloon, said I could have work if I'm willing to clean and help serve." Kellen nodded once. "You want to stay?" "I need to. For now." Her voice was even, but her eyes flicked toward Perry. "I can't keep moving with him unsettled like this." He looked toward the livery stable down the street. "I'll see about a stall for the mare. I'll stay a day or two, make sure you're set." She met his gaze. "You don't have to, I know." That evening, Vera sat on the back steps of the boarding house, Perry asleep against her chest. Kellen leaned against the porch rail, watching the last of the light stretch long across the yard. A kitchen curtain stirred behind them with the breeze, carrying the smell of boiled cabbage and flour. "You ever think about settling?" she asked. "I did once. Thought maybe I'd put up fence posts, raise a few head." He let out a quiet breath, but I kept putting it off. There was always something else to do first. She shifted slightly, mindful of the baby. "It's not easy. Staying in one place means you have to face the quiet." He studied her face, the way the dusk softened the angles. "You planning on staying here long?" "I don't know yet." "He needs rest and I need work, but it's not home." "You think you'd know what home felt like now?" She looked up at him, steady. "I think I'd know what it didn't feel like." The next morning, Kellen saddled his mare early. He didn't wake Vera. Just left a small bundle of supplies on the porch floor, a bit of sugar, and a whittled wooden horse he'd picked up from a peddler the day before. He rode out slow, not looking back until the town was just a line against the land. By midday, he stopped near a clump of cottonwoods. Tied the mare, took off his hat, and sat in the grass. For a long moment, he stared out across the hills, the silence pressing in. Then he stood, brushed off his trousers, and turned the mare back toward town. Vera was sweeping the back step when she saw him returning. She didn't say anything, just watched him tie off his horse near the fence. Perry was cooing from a basket nearby, kicking his feet gently. Kellen walked up and leaned on the railing. "I thought you'd gone," she said. I did. He paused, then added, didn't feel right. She stepped down, brush still in hand. What didn't, leaving you here with no one to count on? She looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. Mrs. Finch said there's a room upstairs that needs fixing, roof leaks some. If you wanted work while you stayed. He straightened. I reckon I could manage that. They didn't smile. They didn't need to. That evening he carried a bucket of nails up the narrow stairs while Vera bathed Perry in a tin basin by the hearth. The sound of the baby's laughter drifted into the hall, clear and easy. And for the first time in years, Kellen felt the shape of something real beginning to form quiet and strong, like a beam laid across solid ground. By late July, the rains had eased and the air carried the scent of sun-warmed lumber and horse sweat. Laramie bustled more than it used to, families coming in from the outlying homesteads for supplies, and a new brick building going up near the station. Kellen repaired the boarding house roof over the course of a week, then started tending to other small jobs, mending loose shutters, rehanging doors, anything that kept his hands busy and his boots in town. Vera worked mornings in the saloon kitchen. She came back by midday, cheeks flushed, apron heavy with flour. Perry had taken to watching her from the kitchen doorway, babbling as she moved, and when she leaned down to kiss the top of his head, her smile held something softer than relief. Kellen watched it all from the side, never pushing, never asking for more than she offered. But she offered more with each passing day: a folded shirt on his cot, a tin of cooled coffee left on the porch rail, her voice humming low as she rocked Perry in the lull between afternoon and evening. One morning, as he handed her a wrapped bundle of boiled eggs and bread before she headed off, she paused at the doorway. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes on the floorboards. "I could take in some sewing. Mrs. Finch knows a few women who'd pay fair for mending. Might be better than wiping down tables. You want to leave the saloon?" "I'd rather work where I can keep Perry close," he nodded. "You do good with that." She looked up. "I know I can manage on my own, Kellen, but I'm tired of just managing." He set the bundle down. "Then don't do it alone." She stepped closer, slow, as if testing the steadiness of the floor beneath her feet. "You still planning to ride out come fall?" "I was. And now, I keep finding reasons not to." She reached for his hand, her fingers rough from work but warm. "I don't want to wonder what might have happened if I'd asked you to stay. You don't have to ask." He leaned in, not fast, just enough that his forehead touched hers. Outside, a wagon passed, its wheels rattling over the street, but neither of them moved. That night, they sat on the stoop after Perry had gone down. The air was soft, touched with the scent of chamomile from Vera's drying bundles strung near the windows. She rested her head against Kellen's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist without hesitation. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered. "Me either." He tilted his face toward her, pressing a kiss to her temple, then her cheek. She turned, and their lips met, not hurried, not unsure, but like something that had been waiting for its time. When they parted, she laid her hand on his chest, over the place where his heart beat steady. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. He nodded, his voice low. "For good." They married under a cottonwood behind the boarding house 3 weeks later. Mrs. Finch stood as witness. Perry clapped his hands when Vera kissed Kellen, and Kellen laughed, a sound Vera had only heard once before, but now would hear for years to come. They moved into 2 upstairs rooms, knocking down the wall between them. Kellen built a cradle from pine boards, and Vera stitched curtains from scraps of muslin and gingham. She took in sewing as planned, and by winter, her reputation for fine hems and tight seams had spread through town. Kellen found steady work at the livery and spent evenings fixing what needed fixing around town. He kept his saddle, but hung it by the door, oiled and waiting. Sometimes they sat on the back steps after Perry fell asleep, her hand in his, the sky wide and quiet above them. They didn't speak much during those evenings. They didn't need to. He never left again, and she never doubted. Years passed. Perry grew tall, with his mother's eyes and Kellen's quiet way of watching the world. He helped in the livery by 10 and could shoe a horse by 12. Vera's sewing shop outgrew the boarding house, and she opened a room on Front Street, the sign reading Ashford and cross-stitchery. Kellen built the sign himself, carving each letter with care. They lived simply, but with contentment sharpened by all they'd once feared they'd never have. And as the seasons turned and the years settled around them, they grew not just older, but rooted, in love, in trust, and in every hard-won piece they shared.